Flight. True flight is difficult to achieve, but is very rewarding for the animals that manage to do it. It is the ability that some of the most successful animals alive today have in common. Insects are one of the most common and diverse of all animals, while birds are the most diverse terrestrial vertebrates. Even bats, often forgotten about in the shadow of the other two, are the second most diverse groups of mammals, only behind the rodents. So today I want to do something a little different for my channel. I want to talk about why flight is so important and how these different animals have achieved it. First, let's define what I mean by flight. I am specifically talking about powered flight. This is where the animal uses its muscles to gain altitude. There are many other things that could be considered flight with a broader definition. There are many animals that can glide or parachute, both of which reduce the rate at which they fall, but do not allow them to increase their altitude. Some animals have even found ways to use things outside of their own body to achieve a type of flight. For example, many baby spiders can use parachutes of silk to catch the wind and fly from their nesting area. While a fascinating behavior, it is still not what I am considering true flight. True flight has independently evolved at least 4 times in the Earth's evolutionary history. This is at least once each for insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats. Actually, a lot of recent research has suggested that it has evolved more than 4 times, with multiple lineages of both bats and birds achieving flight independently of each other. As we will look at later, while there are similarities between these different groups of animals, they have different methods and structures that allow them to fly. If so many different animals have evolved powered flight, or even other types of flight like gliding, then there must be a big reason to do so. There are, in fact, many reasons. The first one is safety. Flying lets you escape from predators that would otherwise be able to easily kill you. To see this example in action, you need to look no further than islands where predators have not arrived until recently. For example, New Zealand has a flightless parrot called the kakapo. I have done a full video on it if you want more information, but the key point about them for this discussion is that they used to be common on the mainland, but can now only survive on offshore islands. The reason for this is the introduced mammalian predators. Kakapo can't fly to escape. They can still glide a little, but they don't even do that very well. This makes them easy targets for cats, stoats, and other predators. The offshore islands where the kakapo still live have either never had mammalian predators, or humans have managed to remove all of the predators from the island. Either way, the offshore islands protect them, as there is no way for their populations to survive in the wild on the New Zealand mainland while the predators are still there. Backing up for a minute, even the existence of flightless birds suggests that when the pressures of predators is removed, the benefits of flying no longer outweigh the costs. So birds whose ancestors could fly will lose the ability, like has happened with the kakapo. Many birds that are either flightless or poor flyers have evolved on isolated islands without the presence of predators. Kakapo are one example, but there are many others. The Campbell teal is a flightless duck only found on Campbell Island, and the dodo, while now extinct, was a flightless pigeon only found on Mauritius. Of course, this doesn't explain all flightless birds. The ostriches managed to do it in the middle of Africa, but it does help to explain many of them. There are other reasons that flight is useful, but I would argue safety is perhaps the most important, as suggested by the flightless examples on predator-free islands. Another way flight is beneficial is that it gives access to resources not available to land-bound animals. Whether this is food in high or hard-to-reach places, or nesting or perching areas that are otherwise inaccessible, flight makes this much easier. Yes, many of these places could be reached if the animal has the climbing skills required, but flying is a much faster and more energy-efficient way to do it. As a form of movement, flying also allows the animal to travel much further, much faster. Without obstacles in the way, flying is far quicker. No need to go around trees or climb mountains, simply fly over the top of them. This also lets the animals cover more ground, which is very useful if they use rare or hard to find resources. For example, Vultures would not be able to find carrion quickly enough to survive if they couldn't fly, and birds like albatrosses that rely on seafood would either need to find something else to eat or follow the penguin's example and become good at swimming. There are also the examples of crazy migrations that some animals undertake. These allow them to reach the perfect places for feeding in half of the year and nesting and raising their young in the other half. The bar-tailed godwit, for example, is a wading bird that travels from Alaska, China and Korea all the way to Australia and New Zealand every year. I don't know if you have looked at a map recently, but if not, just take my word for it. It is a very long way to fly from Alaska to New Zealand. A journey like this would not be possible without flying or swimming, and it is a very long distance in either case. Okay, but if flying has so many benefits, then why don't all animals fly? Well, there are some large costs to flying, and some sacrifices that need to be made. The first is that there is a size and weight limit to animals that can fly. The largest flying animals alive today are all birds. Albatrosses, pelicans, condors and storks make up the top 10, if their size is based on wingspan. The largest is the snowy albatross, with a maximum recorded wingspan of 3.7 meters or 12.2 feet. If you are interested, the largest bat is less than half of this size, with the giant golden-crowned flying fox getting up to a wingspan of around 1.7 meters or 5.6 feet. Insects are, of course, much smaller, and their larger size is harder to determine as weight is likely a bigger indicator for them than wingspan. However, all of these pale in comparison to the extinct flyers. All of them have extinct relatives that outstrip their living examples, but none of these compare to the largest flying animals ever known, the pterosaurs. Quetzalcoatlus northropi was an Isdarchid pterosaur from the late Cretaceous. Estimates of its wingspan have varied greatly, with some even getting as high as 21 meters or 68 feet. Today, it is believed that this estimate is a gross exaggeration, and the true number is likely around 10 or 11 meters or 32 to 36 feet. This is still 3 times larger than any modern flyer and an absolutely massive size for something capable of powered flight. The vast majority of flying animals are much smaller than this, and they have all had to make sacrifices to reduce their weight to enable them to fly. Since we are discussing size, I should also point out that there is likely a minimum size requirement for flight. Animals that are too small will be floating instead of flying, as they would not be able to fight against the wind currents and go where they want to. The smallest known flying vertebrate is a shared spot between a bat and a bird. The bumblebee bat and the bee hummingbird both weigh about 2 grams or 0.071 ounces, and this is likely the lower limit for a flying vertebrate. Flying invertebrates can get much smaller, such as the fairy flies. Keep an eye out for a video on them coming soon. And they can get down to 0.15 of a millimeter or 0.0059 of an inch long. This is a ridiculously tiny size that makes flying for them more similar to swimming, and their wings are used more similarly to oars. Another cost is that flying requires a lot of energy. This is why birds have such high metabolisms, and so require a lot of food for their size. The vertebrate with the highest known metabolisms are hummingbirds, which not only have excellent flight capabilities, but are also small. Their size is important, as smaller animals have higher surface area to volume ratio, which means that they lose heat a lot faster. Something that is common among most, if not all, of the largest flying animals is that they are specialized in soaring. Soaring is using wind thermals to stay aloft without needing to expend the energy for true powered flight. Condors and albatrosses are both well known for this, and pterosaurs likely utilized it as well. These animals will circle high above the ground or water, essentially gliding with the occasional beat of their wings as they search for the right air currents. When they do, this will let them gain altitude without using more energy to do so, and so they can circle around, essentially staying aloft indefinitely. These animals still do have powered flight, as they need to use their muscles to get off the ground, but once in the air, soaring massively cuts down on the normal energy requirements for flying. The first group of animals known to have developed powered flight are the insects, or to be more exact, the insects in the subclass Pterygota. This clade includes all flying insects and about 99% of all living insects, only excluding the bristletails and silverfish. The first flying insects appeared during the mid-Carboniferous period, about 328 to 324 million years ago. The exact origin of flight in insects is poorly understood, but once it did develop, insects quickly underwent massive diversification, no doubt making full use of the benefits of powered flight. Working out how flight originated in insects is difficult for various reasons. Insects do not fossilize easily, so getting fossils of the earliest insects is difficult, if not impossible. The oldest insect fossil we have is about 400 million years old, so before they developed flight, but genetics suggests that they first evolved about 480 million years ago. Transitional fossils showing the evolution of flight simply do not exist. At one point we have no fossils of flying insects, and then after that they exist. We have no physical evidence of how they went from one to the other. Unsurprisingly, there are theories. Mayflies are one of the oldest orders of flying insects still alive, and they look very similar to the first flying insects that we know of. This makes them a good candidate to study, to try and work out how insect wings originated. In 2020, Almudi et al. Did exactly this. Based on their research, they suggest that insect wings originated from legs that have been modified for flight. They believe this to be the case because this is how gills in aquatic insect larvae are believed to have originated, and the researchers found genetic similarities between the gills of mayfly larvae and the wings of the adults, suggesting the same or a similar origin is likely true for both of them. Insects typically have two pairs of wings, unlike other living flyers. The most notable exception to this are the flies and beetles. Flies only use their forewings to fly, as their hind wings have evolved into structures known as halteres. Halteres are much smaller than wings and are advanced sensory organs that let flies perform remarkable aerobatic maneuvers. Beetles, on the other hand, only use their hind wings to fly. Their forewings have evolved into elytra. These are the hardened coverings that protect their wings when they are not flying. Insect wings vary greatly among the different orders, despite flight only being believed to have evolved once in insects. This can be explained by the very short time between generations of insects, as well as the long amount of time since they first evolved wings. However, their wings are all made of the same material, chitin. This is the same substance that their exoskeleton is made of, although for their wings it is much thinner, being semi-transparent in most species. Their wings are essentially two layers of chitin, protecting the veins and nerves inside. Insect wings contain no muscles, so their flight muscles are contained within the body. As I have already mentioned, mayflies are one of the oldest lineages of flying insect. This makes it interesting that they, along with the similarly ancient dragonflies, have a significant difference in the flight muscles compared to the other flying insects. In mayflies and dragonflies, the flight muscles are attached directly to the wings. Okay, that is basically what you would expect, so how do the other insects fly? Well, in other flying insects, their flight muscles are attached to the thorax, not their wings. They then contract and relax this muscle to move their thorax, and so cause their wings to beat in a much less direct way than is seen in mayflies and dragonflies. Dragonflies are particularly known for their flying, as each of their wings can be moved independently, giving them much greater aerial mobility. This is not possible in other insects because of the difference in their muscles. Pterosaurs are the first vertebrates known to have developed powered flight, and contain the largest flying animals ever known. Much like insects, the evolution of flight in pterosaurs is not well understood. The oldest known pterosaurs are from the late Triassic, dating back to about 220 million years ago. Pterosaurs we have discovered from this time, such as Preondactylus or Ostreodactylus, were already capable flyers. They did have some features considered primitive, and these would be further specialized for flight in later species, but they were still good flyers. The ancestral species most closely related to them that we know of had no adaptations for flight, such as the small reptiles in Lycopetidae, like Dromaeosaurus. This leaves a noticeable gap in the fossil evidence of the evolution of the pterosaurs. Even these so-called primitive features the early pterosaurs had were rather unremarkable. Preondactylus, for example, is known for having short wings for its size. They do lack features from more advanced pterosaurs as well, but there are few clues as to how they developed flight in the first place. This is not only an issue for understanding the evolution of their flight, but also when trying to decide where they should be placed within the class Reptilia. The current understanding of their phylogeny is that they are archosaurs, like crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds. However, They are more closely related to dinosaurs than they are to crocodiles. It is worth pointing out that pterosaurs are sometimes called flying dinosaurs. This is incorrect, as pterosaurs are not dinosaurs, they are a completely separate group. They are also sometimes called pterodactyls. This is also wrong, although it is closer. The term pterodactyl should only be used for members of the genus Pterodactylus. So, while all pterodactyls are pterosaurs, not all pterosaurs are pterodactyls. I should probably do a video on pterosaurs at some point. Anyway, with the phylogeny tangent over, let's return to pterosaur flight. Their wings were formed from their forelimbs. The fourth finger was extremely long, and this was used to form the structure of their wings. Their patagium stretches from this finger to their legs and tail. The patagium was not just a membrane of skin, as used to be believed, but was composed of various tissues, forming a complex structure. For example, the outer edge of their wing, from the elbow to the tip of their fourth finger, was composed of tightly woven fibers, known as actinofibrils. This part of the wing would be the leading edge when they were flying, so it is thought that the actinofibrils strengthened it to help deal with the strain of this. It is unknown exactly which fibers the actinofibrils were made of, whether it was muscles, keratin, or something else, and this also makes it hard to know if it had any other functions. Their wings also contained a thin layer of muscle and a complex system of blood vessels. Pterosaurs also have a unique bone in their wings, known as the pteroid. This is a bone on the back of their arm joined to the wrist and helped to support part of their patagium. Pterosaurs have claws outside of their wing. Only their long fourth digit helps to support the structure of the wing. The other 3 digits are free and will help them outside their wing. Unlike birds, which are bipedal, pterosaurs were not. When not flying, pterosaurs would walk on all fours, using their folded wings and foreclaws along with their legs to walk. Aside from their wings, pterosaurs developed many other features that help with flight. Their bones had thin walls and were hollowed to help them reduce their weight. Flight muscles need to be strong, and so they are very large. This means that they require a place to anchor to on the skeleton. Pterosaurs do this by having a keel on their breastbone. This means that the breastbone has a large ridge, giving it space for these flight muscles to attach. The interesting thing about these skeletal adaptations is that they are very similar to features seen on modern-day birds, despite evolving flight independently. Something unique to pterosaurs, however, is that their skeletons often show a lot of fusion of different bones. This can vary depending on the species, but later pterosaurs have fused their spine around their shoulders into a structure known as the notarium. This helps to stiffen their torso while flying, and also provides stable support for their shoulder blades and so their wings. Other bones are also fused, such as those around their pelvis and even their skulls. Pterosaurs are the only one of the 4 lineages of flying animals to now be extinct. The others are some of the most common animals on the planet, so what happened to the pterosaurs? You probably already know, but they were wiped out alongside the non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period. This extinction event, often known as the KPG extinction, wiped out 3/4 of all animals, and the pterosaurs were one of its casualties. Despite their dominance during the age of dinosaurs, their heyday was in the Jurassic period, and they were likely already in decline by the time of the KPG extinction. The reasons for this are not well understood, but they might have been outcompeted by the early birds, which were also evolving at this time. In addition to this, the Cretaceous was when the pterosaurs really became large, and were in fact the largest of all flying animals to have ever existed, such as the Quetzalcoatlus that I mentioned earlier. This size would have been a major disadvantage during a global calamity. Large animals need more food, and a calamity is a time when food is scarce. So on to the birds then. Birds convergently evolved many of the same features as pterosaurs. They have a keel on their breastbone for their flight muscles to attach, and they also have hollowed out bones to reduce their weight. They are not descendants of the pterosaurs, however. They are the only living examples of dinosaurs. Unlike both the insects and pterosaurs, we actually do know quite a lot about the evolution of the birds. Specifically, they are in the Maniraptora clade of the theropod dinosaurs. This is the clade that also includes the dromaeosaurs, the dinosaurs popularized as raptors by Jurassic Park, despite that movie franchise's questionable depiction of them. Birds are not actually thought to be the only flying member of this clade. In others, there is evidence that some of them, at least, would have been capable of flight. Even in something like Velociraptor, where the adults were too large and heavy for flight, there have been suggestions that the juveniles would have been capable of it. Birds are not only known for flying, they are also known for their feathers. Today, feathers are unique to birds, and so are one of their distinguishing features. However, feathers first appeared in the theropod dinosaurs. They likely developed for insulation to protect from the cold, or perhaps even specifically in newborns. However, feathers also have an important role in flight. The individual feathers in the wings and tail help them maneuver through the air, and all of the feathers around their body reduce resistance when flying through the air. While modern birds look barely recognizable when compared to their Maniraptoran ancestors, ancestral birds certainly retained many of their features. Claws are almost unknown in modern birds. Have a look at my video on the Hoatzin for the exception to that. But they were common in prehistoric birds. Perhaps the most famous of these is Archaeopteryx, as it was one of the earliest discoveries of a feathered dinosaur-like bird. Archaeopteryx also had teeth, something modern birds have replaced with a bony beak with a keratinous covering, perhaps another adaptation to reduce their weight. Wings are of course important to flight, so let us have a look at them. They are of course adapted from the forelimbs of their dinosaur ancestors. In modern birds, this can still be seen in their skeletons, as they contain many of the same or similar bones. They still have a humerus, radius and ulna, the three main bones in your own arm. It is their hand that is drastically different from their ancestors. Birds still have 3 fingers, but these are partially fused together. What I think is particularly interesting is looking at the differences in the structure of bird wings to those we looked at in pterosaurs. The difference between these two is far more than just birds having feathers. In pterosaurs, their 4th finger was extremely long and provided the structure for the entire wing. In birds, it is their arm for the most part that provides the structure. This is just one example of how it is obvious that flight was convergent evolution in these two lineages. The structure of their wings are so different that it is clear that they evolved in different ways. This brings us to the most recent group to evolve flight, bats. Superficially, bat wings look a lot like pterosaur wings, but as we will see in a minute, they are structurally quite different. However, bats do have a thin patagium, more similar to that seen in pterosaurs than the feathers used by birds. Before looking at the wings of bats, it is important to note that the exact morphology of their wings vary greatly depending on the species. The differences are typically explained by their lifestyle. Bats that catch flying insects have longer and more pointed wings to increase their speed and aerial mobility. Bats that use gleaning to catch insects need to move slower and so require a lot of mobility. Their wings tend to be a lot more rounded, as it is thought that the pointed wings are worse when flying near other objects like trees or bushes where these bats catch their prey. Not all bats are insectivores though, and those that eat fruit show a variety of wing shapes. This variety has been proven to correspond to where in the forest they typically find their food. Those below the canopy had smaller wings for their body size to increase maneuverability in a cluttered airspace, and those above the canopy had large wings for their body size to increase speed. I can keep going talking about bats that feed on nectar, fish, other animals or blood, but you get the idea. I do have an entire video about the blood-eating bats if you are interested. Anyway, bat wings are specialized for their lifestyle and ecology. So, how are these wings structured in bats? Bats have 2 arms, each with 4 fingers and a thumb. This immediately sets them apart from modern birds with their 3 fingers. Like with the pterosaurs, bats use their fingers to provide structure to their wing. However, pterosaurs used 1 long finger, with the rest of the structure provided by the membrane stretching to their body. Bats don't need to do this, as they use all of their fingers aside from their thumb. This is very clear if you ever look at a bat's wing. The 4 fingers are splayed, providing different points for the membrane to stretch to, giving them more mobility and control over their wing than was likely achieved by pterosaurs. That may be an unfair comparison, since no human has ever seen a pterosaur fly, but it can be inferred from their skeleton. Bats are typically considered more mobile than the other groups of flying animals as well. As for their muscles, bats have well-developed pectoral muscles, similar to both pterosaurs and birds, although they lack a keel. However, bats also have other muscles that are important for flight. The occipito pollicalis is a group of muscles unique to bats that are found on the back of their patagium and enables them to better control their wings to fly. The evolution of flight in bats is poorly understood. That probably comes as little surprise at this point, since I said basically the same thing for both the pterosaurs and insects. Although maybe you had some hope after we talked about the birds. But either way, the oldest bat we have a complete skeleton for was Onychonycterus. It lived about 52 million years ago and was already fully capable of powered flight. It did have some unique features not seen on later bats, including the proportions of its limbs and claws on each of its 5 digits. These may provide some tantalizing hints to their non-flying ancestors, but are not enough by themselves to give us a full picture of how bats first acquired flight. There are a few known bat fossils older than this, but genera like Archaeonycterus and Altaeonycterus, which were 55 to 56 million years old, are both only known from their teeth. The issue is that bats have naturally small and light skeletons, a necessity for flight, but this does mean that they don't fossilize well. Some estimates believe that we have only discovered fossils of about 12% of all bat genera that have ever lived. Their closest living relatives don't really help to answer this question either, as bats are most closely related to 4 orders: the pangolins and Pholidota, the carnivores and Carnivora, and the hoofed mammals in Perissodactyla and Cetartiodactyla. You might notice a distinct lack of any adaptations useful for flying in those orders, so, like I said, that does not really help either. As I mentioned earlier, bats are one of the groups that some researchers suggest achieved flight independently in multiple different lineages. Anderson and Ruxton in 2020 published a paper suggesting that 3 lineages of bats evolved flight independently. Critics of this research, such as Gardner and Disici in 2022, cite the paleontological evidence. As I mentioned earlier, all bat fossils, where we have enough of the fossil to know for certain, could fly. Since we only have an estimated small fraction of evidence for all bats that have ever lived, this is not definitive, but it is certainly suggestive that all bats evolved from a single flying ancestor. This is basically the Occam's razor argument, for those familiar with philosophy or writing advice. Occam's razor is where the simplest solution is usually correct. Back to the evolution of flight in bats, it would be simplest for flight to have evolved once, and all the descendants of that species can now fly, leading to the bats we know today. It is far more complicated if different lineages of bats independently evolved the ability to fly, and especially since they ended up with very similar structures to allow them to do so. Of course, things in biology are often not simple. Nature does favour randomness, and it is that fact that allows for evolution in the first place. However, at the end of the day, neither hypothesis can really be proven with the information we currently have, and so the subject remains controversial. I hope you have enjoyed this change in format. Let me know in the comments section down below. Flight is a large and complicated topic, but I certainly enjoyed learning about a subject I only knew parts of. It is fascinating to see convergent evolution work on such a large scale. Insects, pterosaurs, birds and bats are all so fundamentally different animals, so it is interesting to see how each of them adapted for flight in their own unique ways. Just as interesting is seeing the similarities between them as well. Thank you for watching this video and have a good day.